about transit-oriented development and what we can do to transform Lowell and other gateway cities throughout the region and improve both transit as well as development across our gateway cities. So I want to welcome you, say thank you very much to everyone for coming today. I also want to give a special thank you to our elected officials as well as to our public administrators who are here. If you could raise your hand. I mean, of course we have, City Manager Donahue here, and we have Mayor Samaras, who is right there. Oh, sorry. So right here with us. If there are any other folks here, yes. So I did see a couple of folks who are also here from the state. So thank you all very much for representing the people as well as doing all the hard work to help us do the kind of things that we need to do to better develop both transit as well as land, economic, community, and workforce development in our gateway cities. I also want to say thank you to our event co-sponsors who are here up on the screen. But first of all, City of Lowell, thank you very much for hosting us. We're very excited to be here in this great space at UMass Lowell, the Innovation Hub, UMass Lowell Innovation Hub. Rory, thank you so very much for hosting us here. Also want to thank the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce, the Lowell Plan, the Lowell Development and Financial Corporation, Middlesex 3 Coalition, Eastern Bank, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, and the Bar Foundation for funding all of the work that we're doing on this particular initiative and for this particular event. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking because I want to make sure that we are able to spend as much time as possible on our panel discussion and give you here in the audience an opportunity to ask a lot of questions of our panelists as well as our presenters, which includes myself and Alexandria Markievich, who is here from MassDOT. But before we kick that off, I want to first invite Mayor Samaras to come up and kind of welcome you all here to the City of Lowell, and then we'll be followed by City Manager Donahue, who's going to give you some opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of Lowell City Council and City Manager Donahue, I'd like to welcome you all here this morning to the City of Lowell and the Haverhill Canal Innovation District. I'm very pleased to see Mass Inc. here in our city to talk about the future of development. Not only in Lowell, but truthfully, the entire Commonwealth. But I do think with the progress being made in our city right now, Lowell could serve as a nod for transit-oriented development in gateway cities. We gathered this morning at the UMass Lowell Innovation Hub, right in the heart of the Hamilton Canal Innovation District. No more than 15 minutes away is the Gallagher Transportation Terminal, which serves both as our rail connection to Boston, but also the hub of our public bus system. As you walk this morning, you may have noticed that the green Vio Ride bikes of our new bike sharing program, which is over the first 2 months, has seen thousands of residents and guests take advantage of the system. I just described 4 ways of traveling into and around the City of Lowell, and not once did I mention private automobile travel. Think about that. We have the resources and tools necessary to make Lowell a hub of transit-oriented development. It's better for our residents, it's better for our businesses, it's better for the environment, and it's better for our drivers too, by lessening the traffic burden of those who have to drive by giving others more options to get around without driving. In recent years, the City of Lowell, the Commonwealth, and our private business partners have been making major developments in the area immediately surrounding the Gallagher Terminal. We have the Thorndike Exchange project where residents and businesses will literally be a bridge crossing away from the commuter rail. We have made millions of dollars in improvement to the South Common, improving an attractive green space that greets our transit visitors. And finally, we have the revamping of the Lord Overpass into a new configuration that supports all forms of transportation and will be a welcoming gateway to the Hamilton Canal Innovation District and the downtown. In closing, I want to thank Mass Inc. for joining us today and for all your work in bringing research-driven policymaking to the Commonwealth, and in particular, our gateway cities like Lowell. I look forward to getting this discussion. I want to thank everybody for your work.
Good morning. my boss stole all my talking points. Good morning. It's great to be here with all of you. I too want to join the mayor in thanking our sponsors. I want to thank Mass Inc. for having this summit here today, which I think will be really, really enlightening. And I also want to thank our state partners, MassDOT and the other representatives from the state. And I think it's particularly important because what the mayor has referred to are a number of developments here happening in Lowell, and I'll touch on a few of those. But before I do, I have one more thank you, and that is to UMass Innovative Hub. Where's Tom O'Donnell? Thank you, Tom. Thank you for hosting us here today. You are part of our partnership and our recipe for success, and this is part of what is making Lowell move forward, and we're very grateful to your constant support. So I think, as the mayor said, it's really appropriate that we are here for this summit in the heart of the Hamilton Canal District. This is our premier opportunity for development in the city. If you look around and you have a bird's eye view here, you'll notice our location, which is really strategically placed. And the mayor mentioned the 1/4 mile or adjacency to our Gallagher terminal, and I want to recognize Jim Scanlon, the executive director of the Lowell Regional Transit Authority. Where's Jim? Who has been a great partner to us in trying to deal with transportation in an urban setting, in an old industrial city, which when it was designed, it was not designed for our 21st century needs for transportation. But the projects that have been alluded to, I think, are really, really innovative, and we couldn't do it without all our partners. There is a tremendous amount of publicly funded transportation projects right now going on or soon to be started in Lowell, and that includes the infrastructure right here in the Hamilton Canal. There's been $7.6 million invested in the infrastructure. That's streets F and G and our signature bridge. Sometimes people say to me, what is a signature bridge? Well, you can't miss it. If you look out the window, you will see a bright blue bridge. And it is more than just attractive. It's something that's going to connect the Hamilton Canal in other parts of the downtown. Obviously, we're immediately adjacent to our downtown, the original historic downtown, but the improvements that are being made are going to totally transform, as the mayor said, how you will get to Lowell, how you will get around Lowell. There's $20 million being spent on the Lord Overpass right here, right outside. This is the kind of tail end, but if you came in via the connector, if you come back in a couple of years, you're not going to recognize it. And that has been funded largely by MassDOT. So thank you, MassDOT, for seeing and working with us and coming up with the design that is just tremendous, and not just for vehicles, but truly for buses, for bikes, for pedestrians. And imagine trying to walk from the Gallagher terminal to this location, 1/4 mile. Most of us should be able to do it, but you wouldn't want to do it the way it's configured right now. It is not friendly for pedestrians. So we are transforming this, not just the gateway, not just for aesthetics appearance, but we're transforming how people, how business, how residents can get around the city in an effective, safe way with 21st century orientation. The Thorndike Exchange that was mentioned by the mayor, that Sal Lapoli is developing right up the street. There was $2 million invested in the Thorndike Exchange widening to make way for that amazing project. Residential, office space, commercial, restaurants. Again, something that if you come back in the not too distant future, you would never realize that used to be the old comfort bedding store for any of those who used to shop there. An old mill that has been totally transformed. And then there's also been a significant investment by the city of Lowell, and I'm honored to represent and work for the city council, who have been very progressive and bold in their support of economic development projects. One thing we do know is that all the planning in the world for the Hamilton Canal District won't work if people can't get there. And so you can't get here easily by turning in on Jackson Street. That's going to change. And when you do get here, we need a parking garage. Now, we have several parking garages. We have one right over the street. And luckily, we're a victim of our own success. It's at full capacity and then some. So the city council boldly voted to build another garage right outside the window here. That'll be starting in the next couple of months. $35.4 million parking garage that the city is funding, as well as $2.2 million that the city has already spent on an innovative design for this garage. So all of these projects will totally stoke investment in the Hamilton Canal District, downtown Lowell, and surrounding areas. And moreover, it will, as I've said, beautify the entrance to this corridor. Let me go back to this corridor and what you see now. So as I mentioned, Thorndike Street has already been widened, and that has been in connection with and in support of the amazing project that the Lipoli companies are underway at Thorndike Exchange. I want to recognize Sal Lipoli, who's here with us today. Sal. Sal has been a tremendous partner here in the city of Lowell. We had the opportunity to tour the Thorndike Exchange. We got an early preview of coming attraction, and it is magnificent. It truly is a beautiful, beautiful project, and congratulations. And we look forward to working with you. And as I said, when you come by, you'll see outdoor dining experiences and so forth, totally transformative. So again, the infrastructure investment is supporting real life projects. It's supporting real life transformation in how the city of Lowell is doing business, how its residents, its business can enjoy this experience. And it provides all of this money that has been put right out this window by the state. It really provides an at-grade boulevard experience. And this is something that has never existed as you came into this old industrial city. It is a game changer. Well, if you look out this window, you can't help but see the $255 million Justice Center that is also going to be opening in the spring of 2020. It's going to totally change the hubbub down here in the Hamilton Canal District. And I think it also will do a lot to spur other investments here. Wind Development is going to be developing 118 units of housing right out over my other shoulder. Look for the Signature Bridge. You're going to see where that housing is going to be developed. And it's 118 units that will be developed, as well as the other infrastructure improvements that I mentioned. Lastly, I want to close with this. In addition to all of the transportation-oriented improvements and investments, the city of Lowell totally recognizes the upward pressure of housing costs in the greater Boston area and in the greater 128 area as well. And these have posed significant challenges to communities all across the state. It's for that reason, and among others, that we are making critical investments now. And the reason is projects like Sal Lipoli's project at Thorndike Exchange adds critically needed market rate housing units along with commercial office space and retail space that is adjacent to our primary hub, the transit hub that can get you to Boston in 45 minutes. I'm going to share a story with you quickly. Last week we were at a summit down in Cambridge. I had to be there bright and early, left my home with plenty of time. It wasn't that long ago. I went in there every day and I don't miss it a bit. But it took me 42 minutes or so to get to the exit, going down 93 for Cambridge. Took me another 48 minutes to get to the destination in Cambridge. Gives you an idea of what traffic and housing costs have done. And so the investments we're doing here provide another opportunity for businesses and residents to come to a place like the city of Lowell, and specifically to come to the city of Lowell. Again, more affordable lifestyle, excellent housing, and office space. And at the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all of the cultural and lifestyle amenities that are already here. We don't have to reinvent them. They are here. And some of those include, obviously, our national park, which is right out the window if you look at the canal for the boat rides, and so much more in terms of museums. our minor league baseball park, which is just a short hop, skip, and a jump down the way, and the Merrimack Repertory Theater, which is an award-winning nationwide outstanding theater. And that's to name a few. Restaurants, cafes, and the like dotting our downtown. So once again, I'm excited to be here and to have the privilege of working for the City Council and the best mayor in America, Mayor Bill Samaras. I hope we have a very productive summit session learning about these opportunities and challenges with respect to transportation. And I look forward to working with Todd. I tried to say transformative transportation, and I said I'm just going to go with Todd. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mass Inc., and good luck to everybody today.
I want to thank Mayor Samaras and Manager Donahue for kind of giving us a really terrific opening remarks. You know, as a former architect, I'm super excited to kind of go out and actually see these developments. I want to get out there and just kind of walk the space and kind of just see how everything is kind of coming together. And I recognize that this is only my third time here in Lowell. And today I was actually commenting that as I'm kind of comparing what I've seen here with other developments that I've seen, you know, the economic and developments in South Carolina and Seattle, Washington for 16 years, and spent quite a bit of time in Europe. You know, the New England has a very European feel. And so to kind of be able to kind of walk through some of our gateway cities, especially here, especially with what's happening here with the waterfront, and you see the walking paths and just the richness and the structure that's already here and that already exists. I'm very excited to kind of see, you know, how things actually develop here in the upcoming years. So, and one of the key things that I actually took away from what I was hearing from both Mayor Samaras as well as from Manager Donahue is that you know, it's really going to take partnership. And so it's great to kind of see so many people here who are ready to kind of take that on. But before we get into a deep discussion about all of the things around the TTOD, or TTOD, or Transformative Transit-Oriented Development, I'm just going to provide you with an overview. But first, let's remember how to work this thing. So down is up. Oh, that's up. And I'm just going to push the button here. Nope, still isn't working. Uh-oh. Oh no. It's asking me to restart the computer. So, no Microsoft will let me do that today. So, okay, that's why it's working. So, all right, so I think I've got it. So, landing slide. By the way, if you actually want to use your social media channels to kind of engage people who are not here today in the discussion, our hashtag is #MassTOD. I might be the only one who likes to tweet during forums and summits and conferences, but if you do, that's the hashtag for today. And see, down is up. All right, so I'm going to get started just by talking about how our gateway cities can get out of what economists like to call the agglomeration shadow. A lot of folks like to talk about Massachusetts and its development really centered on Boston. And Boston is seen as kind of one of these larger cities that casts its a shadow on surrounding communities. And a lot of times things, for example, like our commuter rail system, are designed to actually feed people into and out of Boston as a center of activity. And you know, our gateway communities are kind of seen as hubs, they're seen as spokes. However, we should be really rethinking that and thinking about our gateway cities as their own centers of regional development. Specifically because, you know, the reason why they're called gateway cities, Lowell is a gateway city because it is a city. It is not a suburb. It is not a village. You know, it has the opportunity to really borrow size from Boston in order to spur development and create a very unique sense of place and development here in Lowell, in Lawrence, in Haverhill, and across our gateway cities. But the real question is, how can we strengthen the possibilities and potential of transformative transit-oriented development in our gateway cities? So in April 2018, before I came on board, I didn't join MassLink until December. Ben and his team did an absolutely fabulous job and created what was called the Transformative Transit-Oriented Development report, where they highlighted quite a few opportunities. But as part of the study, they recognized that 13 of the legislated 26 gateway cities have existing or proposed rail service. They modeled the transportation and real estate development opportunities and potential using 4 case studies, including Fitchburg, Worcester, Springfield, and Lynn. Unfortunately, Lowell, Haverhill, and Lawrence weren't in that, but they were included in the kind of bigger projections to kind of look at what could actually be done as far as potential is concerned. As the forest graph here shows, after looking at all 13 of those gateway cities, realized that of the expected growth that is expected here, I think we were talking earlier this week that by 2040, expecting 600 to 800,000 new people to move to the state of Massachusetts. And just in the 13 gateway cities with existing proposed rail service, we have the capacity to add 140,000 new residents and jobs just with the existing infrastructure. But if we do more development, if we're more coordinated, if we do more partnership, we can actually potentially increase that number. And so what are we doing about it at Massey? We're looking at 2 distinct bodies of policy. Transportation policy with a specific emphasis on transit, as well as development policy. And as I mentioned before, the development policy side of it includes not just real estate development, but also economic development, workforce development, and community development. And keep in mind, I realize that I forgot to mention that, whenever it comes to that 600,000 new folks are expected to come here into Massachusetts, a lot of this harkens back to the Governor Baker's Future of Transportation Commission's report that outlined what the development potential would be, emphasizing that our gateway cities should be regional hubs for development across the state. So, also, down is up, not up is down. There we go. We also outlined in the report that there are 3 areas where we can create virtuous benefits that kind of reinforce one another to spur and exponentially grow development in our gateway cities. And these include environmental, fiscal, and equitable growth benefits. On the environmental side, we have significant environmental concerns that we really need to address, including not just greenhouse gas emissions, which a lot of the conversation tends to center around, but also pollution, which impacts public health, as well as climate sensitivity. We know that floods and major climate events can disrupt, as anyone who was here for the winter of 2015 knows, that a lot of things shut down, not only in Boston, but across the state. I actually also remember, in addition to having transportation challenges, I remember actually internet connectivity and power going out. So there are some significant challenges we need to make sure that our cities are well prepared for. So when we think about ways that TOD can be transformative, the first way is through proximity, by ensuring that we actually locate households closer to places where people work, learn, and play. We can also think about efficiency, ensuring that we're creating smaller housing units or having units that are actually sharing infrastructure and walls to actually decrease heating and electricity costs. Third, thinking about activity and increasing the amount of activity that is around our rail stations and other intermodal hubs in our gateway cities, so that people have opportunities to do multiple things and not get in a car. I'm really appreciative to kind of hear both the mayor and the managers talk about, what can we do to make sure it's not just car-centric, but people actually have options for different modes to use. And then finally, making sure that through coordinated strategic planning around our infrastructure and urban management, that whenever there is a major event, we're prepared. On the fiscal side, the report pointed out that specifically in real estate development, but in other areas, we need to think about this in other areas as well, but specifically in real estate development, the gap between what it costs to actually do development and the revenues that are generated from it in some of our gateway cities is actually up to 44%. And so when things just don't pencil out fiscally, we need to be thinking more strategically about that. We at Massey think that through focused, mixed-use, mixed-income, transit-oriented development, that we can have stronger, more competitive regional economies. Ones that are able to produce job and wage growth, thereby generating more income. It also gives municipalities the opportunity to diversify revenue streams from different types of value capture because you have different types of developments that actually occur within the cities. And then in addition, you are able to create more housing, which then leads to an economic expansion for a continuing cycle of more revenues for both the city as well as for the state. This allows our gateway cities to reinvest in communities throughout the city as we talk about things like our neighborhood stabilization initiative and the bill that's currently being debated in the legislature. On the equitable growth side, as we think about our downtowns and our gateway cities, the goal is, of course, we want to make sure that we're bringing jobs and opportunities closer to places where people already live. But we also want to feature amenities that attract workers of all skill levels to our TTOD areas and surrounding neighborhoods. We also want to make sure that one of the things that TTOD can do is also ensure that we're attracting additional employers and allowing employers to expand opportunities in our gateway cities. And then on the third side, making sure that people who already live in our gateway cities have more job and housing choices. So when we think about equitable growth, it needs to be just not only for bringing in new people, but for serving the people who are already in our communities and making sure that we're increasing livability for everyone. And whenever we do this, we're able to then take it beyond the gateway city itself out into the greater region. So one of the things we looked at was the development potential. And as I mentioned, there's two different bodies of policy that we're looking at. We're looking at both development as well as transit. On the development side, and keep in mind that both areas of policy, when we talk about both transit and development policy, they're very large bodies of policies. There are a lot of pieces of legislation that are in the process at the state level. But it's not just at the state level that we should be thinking. We should also be thinking locally. We should be thinking, what things we could be doing in coordination with other jurisdictions at the local and regional levels. But also there are some federal opportunities that are out there. But if you take a look at this map, we put together a kind of a locator that shows you the rail lines and where the areas, or concentrated areas are of enterprises that have more than 50 employees in them. And so this kind of gives you a sense of kind of where the concentration of opportunities are in northern Massachusetts along the Lowell and Haverhill lines. But one thing also consider is that, I think the statistic is between 60 and 70% of all employment in the United States is actually with small and mid-sized businesses. So if you have, a 45-person business and you have a couple thousand of those, that's much better than having one business that's only 45,000 people. And so as we also want to take a look at kind of where the job density is. And so this kind of gives you by zip code where the highest concentration of jobs are in the region. And so as we think about jobs and the ability of jobs and the ability of employers to be able to fuel development, these are some of the policy opportunities as far as the policy window is concerned that are available right now in the State House. So a couple of them that I really want to point out include the HDIP, which was enacted in 2010, was actually revised in 2016 to make it a little bit more accessible to some of our developers. We know that we need to do a little more to increase the cap and make it more robust because we have a very aggressive need for more accessible, not just affordable housing, but attainable housing. And so making sure that the housing that's developed actually aligns with people. I forgot to tell you to turn your phones to stun before the event, but yeah, well, it's all right. So yeah, to making sure that the housing that is actually developed is actually something that people can actually afford. We also, I just also want to point out, let me make sure I'm going back to my notes. Also in 2017, the federal opportunity zone legislation was enacted. I think that there's a lot of folks who are still figuring that out. There's been a lot of discussion around the real estate opportunities and opportunity zones that are happening, and I think that people are still trying to figure out how that also can be used for economic, particularly small business development in our gateway cities and in our communities that have opportunity zones, a lot of which tend to overlap with our TOD areas and our gateway cities. And I highly recommend that you take a look at the tools that list local initiatives for supporting communities. Thank you. Yeah, LISC is an organization, a nationwide organization with a very strong office here in Massachusetts that is doing a lot of really great work on opportunities on trying to figure out, that's one of those build a plane while it's flying kind of pieces of federal legislation that's been enacted. Also, wanted to point out, of course, we issued our neighborhood stabilization report, which then turned into legislation back in January. That is something that we want people to kind of be actively involved with, making sure that we're able to address the spotlight issues that are happening in our gateway cities. A lot of times when we talk about development, we think about some of the wonderful projects like the one that Sal is doing right here down by our TTOD, by the rail station. But there also, we have a lot of triple deckers in our gateway cities. And I know that I live in one in Boston, and there's a spot like on the way to my kitchen where I'm afraid I'm going to wind up in the basement if I step too hard. And so we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to actually improve the quality of our existing housing stock and make sure that we're giving people, once again, housing choices and options for different types of housing units. But then, of course, there's the housing choice bill that Governor Baker talked about, calling for 135,000 new units. If we're expecting to have, 600,000 to 800,000 more people coming in here by 2040, we're going to need a heck of a lot more than 135,000 new housing units. But at least this is a good start. I also want to point out that just back in March, the Massachusetts Office of Business Development initiated its vacant storefront program. That is something to also keep an eye on. And actually this past week was the GreenWorks program. Still trying to figure that one out. I know it's $1.3 billion allotted to municipalities to be able to use that to make energy systems more efficient. Having done a lot of work with the energy industry in Washington State, I can say that there's a really great opportunity not only for municipalities to electrify their fleets for some of the vehicles that are used to do services around the city, but there also are opportunities to collaborate with other cities to then put in, and also to work with RTAs to ensure that kind of electrifying fleets and kind of moving off of fossil fuels to improve air quality and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then I'm going to try to run through this a little more quickly so we can get Alexandria up here to talk about rail vision. But on this transit service side, the report found that with an increase in frequency and speed and by improving bidirectionality, we could more than double the ridership of our current commuter rail system. Not only that, the improvements in speed could shave as much as 15 minutes off of the 46-minute trip that it takes right now to get between North Station and Lowell. And so, as we kind of think about that, that was a very preliminary report, but Rail Vision is doing some really great hard work to kind of identify, what are the real options, what are the real possibilities. Like I say, Alexandria will tell you about that a little more in a minute. But they have a couple of scenarios, a few of which actually provide 15-minute all-day service to key stations along the entire system, which along the Lowell and Haverhill lines includes Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, Ballardvale, sorry, and I have to read my notes here. Sorry, and Anderson, Woburn, so because I can't see that at the same moment. So those areas will get actually 15-minute all-day service with some of the scenarios that are offered under Rail Vision. And so, but before we get away from kind of thinking about what the potential would be around transit service, make sure that it's not only about improving the service along the rail lines, but also making sure that we're actually getting people to places where they need to go to live, work, learn, and play in between the rail lines. As you saw from the areas of job concentration, we need to get folks not just down the rail lines, but for example, how do folks get from Lowell to all the jobs that are available in Metro West? Think about Middleborough, Southborough, Framingham, or how do we get folks, from Lawrence over to some of the areas of job concentration as well. I mean, we need to be thinking about how to get people in between our existing transit infrastructure. So when it comes to policy opportunities there, I mentioned Rail Vision, which the task force released its options earlier this year, back in March. But before that, I know that the Transportation Climate Initiative is something that we're working actively with right now. Actually, I have a meeting this afternoon, which is the reason why I have to get back to Boston after this event, which is a collaboration not just across Massachusetts, but among states throughout the Northeast, including New Jersey, I think Pennsylvania, I think New York is finally on board, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, all working together to improve transit efficiency through a cap and trade or cap and invest program. And so kind of examine what that's going to look like. And of course, we talked a little bit about the Governor's Future Transportation Commission report. I think that that is something we need to spend a little more time kind of communicating just exactly what that vision is, and then talk about more specifically how our gateway cities can play a much stronger role in making, kind of actualizing some of the recommendations in that report, and actually breaking that down to ensure that we get to where we need to be in the next 20 to 25 years. But also, one of the key things also is that Speaker DeLeo and Senate President Spilka had called for revenue ideas from the business community. We are, for those of you who are in the audience who are part of the business community, I'm still looking for someone else to participate in a June 13th conversation that we're going to be having around revenue ideas and what kind of ideas the business community can put on the table. So we're actually hosting that in Cambridge from 10 until 2 on the 13th, but it's only open to folks who are either businesses or representing the business community. And so we want to really hear from you, and we really need your input, because right now all the meetings that I've been to around this have been primarily, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 gateway cities, have been all conversations about people who are in Boston, from people who are in the Boston metro region. And of course, we had the budget bill amendments that happened in April to increase funding to the RTAs, as well as funding South Coast Rail, but of course there's more that we can do to make sure that we're improving our transit service. So I'm going to stop there, say thank you. Please check out our website for more information about our TOD initiative. Talk to me, talk to Ben, who, of course, he's been doing really great work on this stuff for years. But talk to us if you want to get more actively involved. Check out our podcast, tweet. But in the meantime, I'm going to have Alexandria come up and talk to you about Rail Vision, which is very exciting. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alexandra Markievich. I work for the Office of Transportation Planning. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about Rail Vision. How many of you guys take the commuter rail regularly? Awesome. Okay. So Rail Vision, first I'll go over a little bit about what it is. Then I'll talk about what our 7 service alternatives that we're evaluating are. And then I'll talk about a little bit about the analysis we're doing this summer. So Rail Vision is our long-range planning effort to understand how we can better leverage the 388 miles of commuter rail that we have. We have 6 objectives, and the first couple are kind of the focus of today's conversation: increasing economic vitality and better matching our service to the mobility needs of our region. But we're also looking at passenger experience, providing an equitable system, climate change, understanding climate change and resiliency, and maximizing our return on investment. I will note this process is fiscally unconstrained, so we have a great opportunity to kind of understand what the needs are and then figure out how to get there. A little bit about our process. So we started this process a year ago, and we took a look across kind of international systems across the U.S. to understand what are the types of changes that we can make to better kind of meet our needs. And we took a look at our own system and kind of understood where can we kind of use different types of service, different levels of frequency, different kind of ranges of service, and created a very long list of concepts that we kind of tested throughout this last year. And through that process, we were able to winnow down to the 7 service alternatives that we released, as Tracy mentioned, in March. And so now we're in the process of running those alternatives through kind of a rigorous analysis to understand what are the capital investments required in order to deliver those service alternatives, as well as what are the projections of kind of ridership, or what would the ridership response be for kind of if we were to actually deliver those alternatives. And through that process, we'll be able to kind of present our results to our Fiscal Management and Control Board in the fall, as well as the public and stakeholders, and understand kind of what is the recommended vision for the future based on the information that we'll be getting from this analysis of the 7 service alternatives. And I will note that we kind of have a hard deadline at the end of the year, and that's because the operating contract for the commuter rail system, which is currently operated by Keolis, is up in 2022, and we want to make sure that whatever we learn from this process, we're able to filter into the parameters of the next operating contract for the commuter rail system. And so that's sort of an overview of our process in general, and now I'll talk a little bit about what the alternatives themselves are. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but we have information about all of them on our website, and I encourage you guys to take a look and provide us feedback. So all of the alternatives aim to reduce travel time, increase service frequency, and improve connectivity to varying kind of degrees and in different ways across the 14 lines of the commuter rail system. So we've talked a little bit about the Lowell line, the Haverhill line, but we have all these other lines as well. And so we're looking at how we can deploy different vehicle technology, think about service stations, spans of service, and other kind of nitty-gritty infrastructure issues like double and triple tracking across the system through a range of these 7 alternatives. So before I talk about what those 7 are, I'm going to hit on 4 of the major issues that are addressed in each of the alternatives. The first is station typology. So we have 14 lines, but across these lines, we find that we have kind of buckets of similar types of stations, and Tracy mentioned the key stations. That would be our gateway cities, so Lowell, Haverhill, Lawrence on these lines, but it's also key places like Anderson, Woburn, where the commuter rail intersects with the highway network, and you're able to kind of pick people off the highway network that want to get into downtown Boston or kind of out on the rail lines. And so across the alternatives, we have kind of a treatment for key stations that is uniform across the different types of alternatives. We also have our inner core stations, and so these are kind of a different type of station, and these are sort of the area within the 128 kind of band where they're in kind of that contiguous dense urban area of down kind of the greater Boston area, and we can see sort of what are kind of the needs of those types of stations throughout a different treatment in the alternatives as well. And then we have our outer stations, and so these are in primarily lower density areas between the key stations and the outer parts of the region. And they have kind of similar characteristics as well. In addition to thinking about that frequency of service to all those different types of stations, we're thinking about how can we deploy investments in bringing platforms to high level, fully accessible. So currently our system has 3 types of platforms. We have fully high level boarding platforms. This is like what you see at North and South Station or at a Lowell station. I was there this morning. I was. I took the rail here, of course. And then we have mini highs where, that's like what you have at Mishwam or some other stations where only a portion of the platform is high level, and then you have low level platforms where none of the platform is high level. And so, we want to think about how we can bring more stations to be high level boarding platforms. And a primary benefit of that is to make them fully accessible for persons with mobility disabilities, but also that another benefit is that it can speed up the boarding process because it's much easier to board when you're kind of at a level platform. The third major issue is electrification. So this is a really hot topic. We are looking at different schemes for electrifying the system and testing what the benefits of that would be in terms of both, emissions, obviously, but also travel times benefits associated with an electrified power source and a different type of vehicle called an electrical multiple unit where it's more like a subway car where you can kind of speed up and slow down faster. So that will affect travel times. And so you'll see some of our alternatives have no electrification so that we can test the difference. Some of them have partial electrification and some of them have full system electrification. So we'll be able to understand what's the relative benefits, as well as operating and maintenance costs, of course. The fourth issue is that our alternatives feature a mix of some of the major kind of expansion projects that have been discussed and studied over the years. So they all include South Coast Rail, some of them that's phase 1, some of them that's phase 2 full build. which is through the Stoughton line. One of them includes North-South Rail Link, South Station expansion, Grand Junction, which could connect kind of the Allston area through Cambridge, Kendall to North Station, and Foxborough. So what are these alternatives already? We have these 7 alternatives, and I've listed them here, and you can see that they kind of play on different themes of. We actually recently changed the order of them. So we have these kind of pair that are focused on key stations, a pair that are focused on those inner core stations, and then a couple of other ones. But I'll actually use this matrix to talk a little bit about them. So here you can see in this matrix, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but please visit our website for kind of more detailed information. We have the first alternative is just sort of bringing our system, kind of optimizing the existing system. So seeing what we can do, making very minimal infrastructure improvements to increase the frequency to something like a 30-minute headway or 30-minute frequency during the peak to every single station, and a 60-minute frequency during the off-peak. So that's already certainly an increase from what we have today, but it's not as aggressive as what some of the other alternatives are proposing. So the next 2 alternatives are like the diesel and electrified version of a service that would focus on bringing bi-directional 15-minute service to all of those key stations. So for this conversation, that's Lowell, Anderson, Woburn, Haverhill, Lawrence, and actually Reading. But that would be kind of certainly kind of something very different from what we see today, and so we're excited to see what the results of that will be in terms of ridership and understanding what the capital investments required in order to deliver that level of frequency would be. The 4th and 5th one shift that 15-minute all-day focus to the inner core stations, and so we'll be able to test that on those stations that are kind of within 128. And then the 6th one goes all in, and it's providing 15-minute all-day service to both the key stations in the inner core and a high-level service to outer stations as well. And then the 7th one is like a hybrid. We have a slightly different approach on all of the lines, depending on kind of what performed the best during our initial phase of analysis. So that's a little bit about what the alternatives are. Now I mentioned we're in the process of actually testing those through our modeling, both of ridership, but also the kind of scheduling to understand what infrastructure would be required, what capital investments would be required to actually get that level of frequency and those types of service patterns. And so I'll talk a little bit just very briefly for alternative 1, we have those initial results for what the capital investments required to bring up, service to 30 minutes during the peak for every single station bi-directional, and 60 minutes during the off-peak bi-directional to every single station. And so, we intended for this one to be that lower level of capital investments, but it still would require something. It's mostly additional tracks at some stations. This is south side of the north side. We'd be using the Wildcat more, so it'd be kind of having an upgrade there. That's sometimes if you're on a Haverhill train, it goes down kind of the Lowell branch. That's what it's using, this branch we call, or this piece of infrastructure we call the Wildcat branch. But we'll be producing these sorts of maps and information for all of the alternatives to understand where are we going to need additional tracks, where are we going to need all sorts of additional pieces of infrastructure to make sure that our trains can run at that level of frequency. And so that's sort of our next step. In addition, we're also using the CTPS regional travel demand model to assess the projections of ridership associated with each of these alternatives so we can understand that benefit. And we'll also be developing cost estimates associated with the infrastructure and emissions, looking at several other metrics. And finally, we'll be using this new tool called the regional dynamic model, which will have, it's the first time we're going to be using it, but it'll provide an insight into what would be maybe the land use and population shift response associated with some of these infrastructure investments. So please kind of Stay tuned, where we'll be releasing the results with all of this information throughout the late summer and early fall. And we'll be really sharing those, with our board, who will, the Fiscal Management Control Board, who will make some recommendations on how to move forward. So that's all for today, but I look forward to any questions you may have. You can find me after, or any comments.
Alexandria, for that great presentation. I always get really excited because after running a consulting company doing strategic planning, I always love to kind of see what plans are and then trying to work with folks to figure out how to actually implement them. But I think one of the key things to kind of keep in mind with things like with Rail Vision and some of the other planning studies that are happening with Mass DOT, with some of the other statewide entities, is that there's a lot of work that the gateway cities, including the ones that are here in the represented in the room today, can be doing to kind of prepare for that development. But while our panel is getting ready to come up, and I'll just have the panelists come up and kind of grab a seat. We're going to have Roy here on the far end, who's going to be our moderator. He's going to come up and kind of kick us off here in a second. But I want to actually invite everyone, as we're talking about things that our gateway cities can do to prepare for some of the investments that are happening with Rail Vision, to check out the podcast I did with Ed Carr at the Metro West Regional Transit Authority. He talks a great deal about how by just simply improving the parking lot adjacent to the train station and cleaning up the area, that they were able to help drive an increase in ridership with actually very little investment on the part of the state or anyone else. So it was kind of really framing up, kind of really going out there and cleaning up that area. And so it just changed the way that people think about riding the train. So panelists, if you could please come up and grab a seat, and Lori, sorry. By the way, my eyes are really bad, so if I find myself looking for people, it's because I can't really see. So just come on up.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Rory O'Mahony. I'm the Director of Sustainability at UMass Lowell. I'd like to thank by starting Mayor Samaras and City Manager Donoghue for the customary warm welcome to the City Hall for all of our guests. Also to thank Tracy and Alexandra for the great introductory presentations. And if you just give me one moment, I'm going to prepare your third PowerPoint presentation of the morning. Which of course I'm not kidding. We'll do that before 10 a.m. When we were planning this discussion, I decided to forego the introductory presentation because, quite honestly, I don't have any power and I very rarely have a point. So my job this morning is to facilitate the discussion with our great panelists that we have assembled. So let me introduce our panelists to get going. So first of all, we've got Andrew Shapiro from the City of Lowell, also my Lowell Public Matters classmate. We've got Nate Robertson from the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission and formerly City of Haverhill. We've got Teresa Park from the City of Lawrence and Sal Napoli from the Napoli Companies. So we get going with an easy question to start, and maybe we'll start with Andrew. So can you give us an example of a major transit-oriented development in your own community?
Sure. So obviously, the mayor and the manager touched on what we're doing here in the Hamilton Canal Innovation District, and I think as a whole, this represents the primary and major TOD opportunity here in the city, and we're very excited about it. And in terms of the challenges associated with it, there are many, and there have been many, because this is a project that's been out there for quite a while, several years now. But the city moved forward with a pretty rigorous planning process with a former master developer partner, Trinity Financial, to look at ways to redevelop this whole area. And we recognize that because we're only about a little over a quarter mile away from the gallery terminal, the hub for both the LRTA and the MBTA here in Lowell, this represents really the future of the city, the downtown, and we want to really kind of maximize the opportunity we're getting from state investment to being able to implement infrastructure improvements in this district as well. So that's how we're addressing the challenges of redeveloping the area, is working with the state and federal partners to implement the infrastructure that we're putting in, streets F and G, as the manager noted, and our signature bridge, which will better connect the entire district with the rest of our downtown and to our entrance corridor branching off of the Lowell Connector and Thorndike Street. The other challenge really is and this is something that comes up a lot, I think, in TOD conversations, is parking. So the courthouse out here, it's an over $200 million project being invested by the state. DCAM is running the project. It's projected to generate between 12 and 1,500 trips per day. So right off the bat, we're in a situation where we're going to have to accommodate a lot of traffic coming in all modes of transportation and methods coming into the courthouse on every day during the week. And so the city, in its planning efforts, has developed a plan to build a new parking structure, 900 plus space parking garage, which will be kind of on the other end here over the Signature Bridge. It's a $35.4 million project, and it'll get underway later this year. And the hope is that it'll be complete not too long after the completion of the courthouse facility itself. And then from there, we'll have the court, the street infrastructure, the bridge, the parking garage, and from there, I think we'll see a lot more interest in further developing a lot of these other parcels with hopefully mixed income levels of housing, more commercial projects, and we also don't want to create a sterile environment either. So we're very cognizant of the idea of having street level activity going on as well, retail and restaurants and other uses that can activate our ground floors of the developments here. And just one more piece of that is that there's going to be a park right out here, sort of branching off, that will be available so that people can use it as an outdoor amenity, some green space to sort of amplify the area as well. So the addressing the challenge really is partnering with the state, partnering with the federal government, and utilizing funding to best implement the infrastructure projects that will support development here in the future.
Great, thank you. And Nate, from Haverhill's perspective?
Sure, so there have been a number of really transformative projects happening in our TOD area. In Haverhill, you have larger developments that happened almost a decade ago now that utilize 40R districts, mixing affordable housing with market rate housing projects, and those kind of were the first big developments that happened. But I kind of want to talk today about a smaller one. It's right in the heart of our downtown, and it was the first market rate project entirely market rate project to happen in the city of Haverhill, and it set the bar in terms of rent. And it also represents kind of these smaller developments, which I would argue are just as transformative as the larger ones. It's 18 units. It's the JM Lofts building. It was done by Trevorth Companies. The way it penciled out was really utilizing the HDIP program, the state historic tax credits. Without those programs, the project wouldn't have happened. And what Trevorth Companies did is that they took a small, really underutilized, largely vacant, kind of it was office surplus warehouse and space right in the heart of our downtown, and they transformed it into 18 market rate units for housing. They set the bar again in terms of rent. It proved the market. They utilized these state programs in order to make it work, and in terms of the transformative impact of it, it took 3 street-facing retail spaces, and Trevorth Companies still done, with 3 local businesses. One is Battlegrounds Coffee, which has become a really successful coffee company in the Merrimack Valley. Another was Quinn's Canine Cafe, which was a tenant at our farmers market, which goes to show you kind of like this nice pipeline of local craftspeople, local small business owners who are operating in our farmers market, who may not have a permanent space, but suddenly with these spaces open up, working with developers to create a permanent storefront. And this was her second storefront. She has one in Newburyport, now one in Haverhill, and she's employing local people in our downtown. And then the third tenant is the Switchboard, which is a gallery and community art space, which between the 3 of them have totally transformed downtown Haverhill in terms of people walking around in the streets, getting coffee, spending their weekends at the art gallery, bringing their dogs downtown. It's almost I want to say like dog-oriented development happening where businesses are looking at putting dog dishes out for water. But what it does is it creates a walkable, vibrant neighborhood that stitches back together our urban fabric, which we want to have. So we have a number of large projects, the Heights being one of them, and we'll hear about that, and those are absolutely transformative in their own right, but also these smaller ones shouldn't be overlooked.
Great, thank you, Nate. And finally, Teresa, could you give us a quick example of some of the great work that's going on in the city of Lawrence?
Okay, so thank you very much. So when we talk about transit-oriented development, so we kind of look at it as basically, how do you get people to where they need to go? So in the city of Lawrence, we have everything from the traditional way you define it, which is we have the McGovern Center, which is the commuter rail stop, as well as it being an important bus hub as well. Additionally, we also have the Buckley Transportation Center right in the downtown. So that gives you a sense of where the transit lies. So it's interesting that I'm sitting next to Sal, because from that traditional transit-oriented development standpoint, we have Sal, who's built out gazillions of square feet, that might be a slight exaggeration, of both commercial and residential units right in proximity to the McGovern Center. So that that gets people from houses to jobs, where you have where that hub and spoke system works. In addition, we also partner with everything from the Merrimack Valley Transit Authority, Joe Costanzo, as well as, I see Stephanie, I think TMA, right? So in what other ways can we move people from where they live to where they need to go? So some of the things that have happened is, in addition to the concentrated development activity that we're seeing right now on Merrimack Street, we're also thinking about how do we tie infrastructure improvements to development opportunities so that we could actually build out those systems hand in hand. So we're looking at everything from, as far as the multimodal system, we partnered with Sal in basically bringing in MassWorks funds to make improvements to Merrimack Street, which is a significant very important commercial corridor. We also have funding in fiscal year 2023 to build out a rail trail system that's going to connect to Merrimack Street, that's going to get you to the McGovern Transportation Center. Additionally, from a policy standpoint, we have complete streets. So as we're building these systems out, we're doing it in a way that takes into account bicyclists and pedestrians in addition to the car. I just mentioned Joe Costanzo earlier with the MVRTA. So one of the other things that were done is, so when you have a fixed infrastructure system, I mean, it takes time to make those kind of improvements, right? To change those systems to accommodate development. What we can do is, there are more flexible, innovative systems that can pivot better. So one of the things that we do with Joe Costanzo, for example, is they actually created a downtown loop. There was a demand that was being unmet. So he was very quickly able to respond by putting in a bus route that can respond to this unmet demand, and it's one of the highest riderships of their buses in Lawrence. In addition, we're also looking to see how we can connect both the Buckley Transportation Center, which is in downtown, to the McGovern Center, so that kind of like when we talk about the north-south connection, that's kind of like our north-south connection as well. So we're trying to piece together all of those infrastructure pieces, in addition to also looking at where those development opportunities are now happening, will be happening, so that we can make all those connections. I mean, while we're only a 7 square mile city, there's plenty of density. There are people that work in a lot of different places. You just heard about Amazon that's one who's putting their distribution center in North Andover. So that makes me then think about TMA, right? Because that's not a route that's traditionally served. So in what other ways can we continue to meet those demands? So from an economic development standpoint, from meeting the infrastructure requirements and getting moving people and goods, that we could use those systems as well as basically using all those available tools that we have.
Great, thank you very much, Teresa. So we just heard from 3 economic development directors on the municipal side. We're going to flip things over right now and ask a follow-up question to Sal. We also heard a lot this morning about the wonderful Thorndike Exchange development. So Sal, based off the responses we received already, could you give us an outline of some of the challenges and opportunities that you've encountered with specific reference to the Thorndike Exchange project, please?
Sure. First of all, thanks for allowing the Foley companies to be here today. So what's interesting is the panelists that we have up front here today and what we're talking about today, revitalizing or working within gateway cities. We have probably, respectfully, humbly, some of the biggest projects in gateway cities because as a developer, we know that's the future. For example, and we'll end with Lowell, if you look at Lawrence, Massachusetts, we have 3.5 million square feet directly across the street from one of the largest transportation centers in the Merrimack Valley. And that wasn't by accident, that was very strategic. We partnered with Joe, we partnered with the city. We went to them before we even started construction, talked about capacity, talked about relationships, talked about how our customers can better utilize their space. For example, imagine being able to do a housing project next to a transportation center. That transportation center may be at capacity or near capacity, but if you think about it, when is it not at capacity? It's not at capacity at nighttime. So if you were to create a housing component, well, now you're being able to use that same spot twice, one at nighttime, one during the day. So that helps the transportation center, in turn helps the city, but also creates a vitality to the project. So when you look at the Lawrence project, the first thing we did is create the job, and I think that's really important. When you're talking about gateway cities, when you're talking about TOD projects, we want to create the job, get the people to their job, but that job will also create a housing component because eventually people will want to live near their job. When you talk about what the governor is trying to accomplish by creating 135,000 homes in the next several years, just part of his bill, knowing in the future there's at least almost 1 million more houses that has to be created or housing components, TOD projects are critical more than ever. So from there we go to the Haverhill Heights. We're building the first 10-story building in the city of Haverhill for a couple of reasons. First of all, to show other developers, and I think this is really important because TOD projects in gateway cities there are still people that are curious, concerned. Some of those big developers in Boston that we talk to on a daily basis, we're trying to convince them, for example, to come up to the valley and stick your toe in the water, but they're not sure because their whole world centers around Boston, Cambridge, Kendall Square. And what's it like to be in a valley? So when we build projects like Riverwalk, or we're building like the Heights project, we're showing developers that by partnering with the city, by partnering with the state, we can create 10-story buildings that are state-of-the-art. Restaurants on the 10th floor, first floor, create job creations, partner with local education components like Northern Essex Community College. So when you bring those people together, TOD really starts to come into a clear vision. To put TOD on the backs of just cities, towns, and the state, I think that's really unfair as a developer. I think in order to be more successful with TODs, I think the cities, for example, Lowell, for example, Haverhill and Lawrence, we meet consistently and talk about what are the things that you need to help move people around, whether it's parking, whether it's additional stops, whether it's bus lines. The city of Lawrence, as we started to grow, adjusted their bus service to stop right outside of Riverwalk. Today, Riverwalk has 5,000 people that work there every day. So when the 5,000 people eventually got there, we said, okay, let's go create one of the best and most exciting housing components. So when you start to stick your toe in the water with housing in a gateway city outside of Boston, what now has to come into play? MassWorks, HDIP, new market tax credits. So there are these wonderful programs, and I'll tell you, there are developers still today that don't understand the benefits of those three components, or those three vehicles in order to be successful in a project. And then you come back down to finish it off at the Thorndike Exchange. We have an open house on Sunday. We invite anybody who wants to see what that project looks like between 1 and 5. But if we didn't partner with the Lowell Transit Authority, Jim Scannell is right here, right in front of us right now. If Jim didn't do what he needed to do to support us, that project wouldn't exist. The MBTA, if they didn't support us, it wouldn't exist. If MassWorks didn't widen the road, that project wouldn't exist. So when those entities came together, you'll now have, when finished, a $65 million project, 140 market rate apartments that rival anything out there in the state. As a matter of fact, we got our first transfer from Seaport using the transportation, using TOD, the thought of it, up to Lowell, Massachusetts. So as opposed to people taking the transportation center to get into Boston, we now have people moving out of Boston on the rail system, and they'd rather live in a more affordable, they get the same quality, they get the same level of experience, and I think that's really important. You know, we as an organization have been saying it for a long time. If the developers partner with the city and the towns and the state, and we create experiences that are equal to what people are getting in Kendall Square and or Boston Seaport, then we'll get those people out of there to create homes and to create businesses up here. But it's the experience. We need people to say, I can get that same vision in Seaport in Lowell, Massachusetts. And when you walk into the Klondike Exchange, you get that. You get that feel of, and I tell developers, why can't we have the same nice things that Boston has? Why can't we have the same nice experiences that Kendall Square has? You know, and when it's all said and done, as you start to raise your family, you'll exit the city. You'll come to Lowell, you'll come to Haverhill, Lawrence, some of these suburbs, and they will all be centered around Gallagher Transportation Center or transit-oriented developments.
Great, thank you. So, open house this Sunday, 1 to 5?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah,
Mark
please,
down your
anybody
calendars.
wants to come down and see it, you'll see something really,
Great.
really special.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Andrew, I'll start with you again. So many of the projects that we've discussed and heard about this morning are the result of, I think, very innovative and oftentimes long-range planning processes and techniques. So could you give us some examples of some of those processes, the plans, the tools, the techniques that you've used to attract transit-oriented development to Lowell?
Sure. So I mentioned, I think in my previous response, that there was a significant master planning process with respect to the Hamilton Canal Innovation District, this area right here. And there are many partners in the process to develop that. So one of which was Trinity Financial, our former master development partner that worked with us very closely in developing that master plan. Others involved the state, which injected a lot of capital into the infrastructure projects to lay the groundwork for development in this area, as well as in the surrounding areas. Third would be the university. I mean, we're sitting in the UMass Lowell Hub. The fact that they invested so heavily in this property right here, 110 Canal, this is a 55,000 square foot building. It's fully occupied by UMass Lowell, but there's no administrative offices in here. These are all incubator and accelerator programs. So this is the iHub, so there's a lot of high-tech and innovative companies that have flexible office space that they can use right here in this location. Upstairs is M2G2, a medical device manufacturing startup incubator. Downstairs, there's the Nerve Center, which focuses on robotics, research and development, and as well as the Fabric Discovery Center, which received a $10 million grant from the state to start up. And it focuses on fashion and high-tech and wearable technology. So having those partners at the table to decide how we want to re-envision this area was critical. So it's bringing together partners, engaging the community, and trying to think many years ahead in the future about what this area could look like. I would also add that we have tried very hard to tap into other programs like Mass Development's Transformative Oriented TDI, thank you. Sorry, there's so many acronyms in the state, so I get a little crossed up sometimes, but yeah, TDI. And we unfortunately were not successful in getting a TDI district designated for this area, including the area that includes Jackson, Appleton, and Middlesex Streets. But the reason why we are thinking about that, and we are working with our partners at the Northern Middlesex County Coalition of Governments, NEMCOG, to plan for how some of the streets next door will look, because it's one thing to take this blank slate of an area and think about what it might look like in a few years in the future, but it's another thing to think about, well, how will that affect the existing neighborhoods? You know, the small businesses that are there, the residents that currently live there. There's a certain level of affordability in the housing there. So we don't want to completely uproot their lifestyle. We want to improve their quality of life, But we don't want to flip things on their head so that once a lot of developers see the opportunity here in the Hamilton Canal, that things completely change in a way that disrupts the current residents and the current businesses that are in the neighborhood. So we are thinking about that, and we're thinking about that by engaging mass development, engaging our regional planning agency to think about that in the future. And I think that the result of that will be good, high-quality development in this district, but also thoughtful development in surrounding neighborhoods as well.
Great, thanks Andrew. Teresa or Nate, do you want to add anything to that from your own perspective?
Sure. I mean, to echo really a lot of what Andrew said, it's all about future planning and partnerships and having the right folks at the table to really create a vision about what you want your TOD area to look like 10 years, 15 years down the line. For Haverhill, this has been a matter of decades of planning that have been put in place. It started with like 40R districts, smart growth overlays, reducing our required parking minimums, allowing density by right. These were little things that we started to implement into our downtown that didn't pay off immediately, but that we're really now reaping the benefits of down the road. And a lot of these partnerships need to be formed early and continue to kind of move on down the timeline as our downtown has transformed. We took advantage of we were lucky to have mass development create a TDI area in our urban renewal area, and what that did was that it allowed the community to kind of create a partnership of different stakeholders, everybody from educational resources like UMass Lowell to the creative industries and the creative communities in our downtown, downtown developers alongside with municipal officials, all sitting at the same table talking about what they can do to increase or reduce store vacancies. What can we do to reimagine our streetscape and to bring different infrastructure downtown to get more people down here? What can we do to maybe bring a farmer's market into a parking garage? Can we take kind of underutilized spaces and rethink them and reimagine them into new public squares or marketplaces? And little things like that begin to add up and really transform downtowns.
Great, thank you. And Teresa?
I would just build on a little bit on the TDI, which is a Transformative Development Initiative effort. So that allows us a fellow for 3 years to actually work on a very specific work plan for a very targeted area. And our TDI district pretty much falls into downtown. But one of the things that's been really interesting is when we're talking about public process, when we're talking about revitalization, I think one of the things we really have to understand well is the people that we're planning for. And one of the things that the fellow was able to do is get a better understanding of the demographic that's living in these newer developed apartments, newer developed projects. So whether that's the property that sell overseas or the ones that are closer into the downtown. And what we're finding is that those demographics are very different than the demographics that we typically see in our census. So what we're mindful of is as we undertake efforts, whether it's in the cultural realm or whether it's in a small business assistance, where we're talking about improvements to the public realm, we're trying to get folks that may not be invested in the community just yet, to the extent that they could be, to become more vested and be a bigger community partner to us. So in the long term, what we hope is that there's a deeper connection between the residents and the community as we develop our city, and that they become not just residents, but they also become consumers. They also become, they basically become really part of the permanent fabric of the city itself.
Great, thank you, Teresa. I think in every response to our questions, we've heard partnerships mentioned over and over again. I think that's really critical, especially in the gateway cities. So to Sal's introductory remarks about some of the challenges and opportunities encountered with the projects, I think it's fair to say, Sal, that you're a veteran of TOD at this stage. So given your experience, what new economic development tools or policies would you like to see developed to assist with TOD in our gateway cities?
So I think what's exciting with TOD programs to have more of a connection with the city and the state. If there was a representative from the city, if there was a representative for the state, and there was don't want to call it a mandatory, but a customary meeting once a month or once a quarter, and you were in City Hall and you were just talking about vision. Because I think that's really, really important. We talked a little bit about visioning, and we do that. We have projects that are in the queue right now that we're not going to break down for 5, 6, 7 years from today. So the faster you can start talking about that with that public-private partnership, I think the better off we are. I think what's also really important is to introduce developers of the programs that are out there and how to streamline some of those programs. When you start talking about HDIP, that's a great program, and then making changes critical in the housing component. Mass work screen. Does a developer really understand some of the developers that we want to nurture and rise and have that tide rise? Do they really understand if they look at a particular piece of property, could it be eligible for some infrastructure that is done off-premise in order to support their project? I guarantee you this, if more developers knew the partnership that could be created with MassWorks or HDIP, you'd see more people jumping into the water. I think some of the other programs that are out there that we as a developer need support, new market tax credits. What a great, great product. What a really hard product to get through. If you don't have the right team, if you're a small developer and you're trying to break into the new market tax credit understanding, it is really challenging. If you're a big outfit, well then you have people that's what they do for you, and that's really important. But how do you help that small entrepreneur that's a developer? How do you help him get into the new market tax credit? I promise you, if anybody was to look through that program or try to understand or see what the expenses in with the new market tax credits, it's really kind of a, well, maybe next time I'll jump into that new market tax program. We don't want you next time. We want you now. So I think a better understanding of the programs that exist, a better understanding, and this is what developers don't do a good enough job on. The city does, and the city, it's really hard. And on behalf of the developers, I'd like to challenge the developers a little bit, because too many developers walk into City Hall and they say, what can you do for me? It's really not the way it goes. When we walk into City Hall and we sit down on a particular project, we start with this question. What does the city want for this particular project? What are your needs? We were in a meeting a couple days ago in Salem, Massachusetts, and a couple days ago in Gloucester, and our first questions are, what is the need of the city and/or area right now? I don't think developers do a good enough job. Where are the areas that are next to TODs that we could create some kind of collaboration? Ask the city. We were in Gloucester and we sat down in front of the mayor not 24 hours ago, and the first question out of our mouth was, what can we do near a TOD? There wasn't a property on the market for sale. It was the mayor, who's incredibly dynamic for the city of Gloucester, town of Gloucester. It was the mayor who said, we can make that phone call for you because we know off the record that that gentleman or that company is looking to sell that real estate. So some of your best opportunities might come from next to TOD projects just by asking or networking. Instead of just trying to bull rush or only looking at properties that are on the market, why don't you go to the city or town next to these TODs, and maybe you can aggregate 2 or 3 pieces of real estate. And if you have the partnership that we have in Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill, well, they might look at that and say, you know what, maybe it's time to rezone that area because of the cluster that you create. So I think that's probably something that, as a developer, we need to do a better job in.
Excellent, thank you. So I literally have a whole page of other questions, but I'm conscious of the time, and I think one of the benefits of having such a knowledgeable and informed panel is that they've pretty much answered all of them already. So what I would like to do is open it up to questions from the audience. I think we've gotten so many, thought-provoking and really, really interesting approaches to TOD with a focus on the gateway cities. So I'd like to leave enough time for the audience to engage with our panelists and ask your specific questions.
Thank you. My particular concern in the whole Gateway Cities program is what is going to be the driver behind this. We know what drives development and innovation in the Boston-Cambridge area. We know that it's the cluster of lots of good brains together, face-to-face, able to exchange ideas. It's the presence of venture capital firms. It's a whole bunch of things that cause that to be very, very productive. But we also know the very big problems too, that associate with the housing costs, the transport, and so forth and so on. But what I'm asking is, wait, now you want to sort of create sort of satellites, if you like, that is outside of the immediate Boston, Cambridge area, but in areas that are surrounding that. And what is it that they have an advantage in that can compete with Kenmore Square? And that's difficult because Kenmore Square has got a lot of cluster of people. A lot of people go there because of that. And this is well established. I mean, we know this from the experience all over the country. I would suggest, and it's a question I'm asking now, has anybody thought of manufacturing? I was really glad when you talked about this building have some degree of manufacturing in it, because there's some substantial evidence that giving up manufacturing to just do innovation is not going to lead you. It's going to break down eventually. And there's people who've written about this, a couple of people over at the Harvard Business School who've written about this, and others. And I'm just wondering, because I'm thinking this is one of the advantages. You come out, get out over a wider area further away from Boston. The big advantage you have is you've got more space. You know, it's not Kenmore Square, you've got space. Now, I just want to know if that's leading, is part of the thinking now, is to move it to some extent. Now, I'm not talking about the old manufacturing, I'm talking about advanced manufacturing using very up-to-date, high-tech techniques.
I think Andrew.
Yeah, I'll just touch on a couple of those things. So one, you asked like what the value, what the draw is here, and I would say number one, value. Okay, if you're a company that's starting up, you can go to Cambridge and Boston and be with a lot of your peers, be right outside the door of MIT in Boston, but you're going to pay quadruple the rents to be there. So one thing I would tell someone is, if you come up to Lowell, you can have access. And hopefully through some of the improved access that we'll get through the MBTA, access to the Boston and Cambridge ecosystem, but you can be here for a quarter of the price and put all that money you would have been spending in rent in Boston and Cambridge into your own R&D or staffing or investments. So that is something we tout all the time. And yes, we absolutely are thinking about manufacturing. We have a building over across the river on Pawtucket Boulevard called Cross River Center. There are some manufacturers in there. There's one called Metrographics. They were recently acquired by a company called Surtech Medical. They create thin film circuits that go into medical devices. And so they have a very complex manufacturing process, but they're growing at a pretty rapid rate. They've expanded recently. The city has invested in them through tax increment financing agreements and worked with them to access state-level tax credits. And we want to kind of double down on that activity as well. And just the final word on the manufacturing piece, we did have a conversation with a prominent life sciences developer in the state. And we had a conversation initially about the Hamilton Canal Innovation District. Can we work with you to get a life sciences focused development here? And they were honest with us. They said, look, we don't necessarily see that. We think that a lot of life sciences firms are going to be more focused on Boston and Cambridge, because they're very much tied to the extreme proximity of being in Boston or Cambridge. But what they did express was, they said, but what we could do, and what we would be interested in talking to you guys more about, is the opportunity for life sciences biomanufacturing, because that is not tied to location. Okay, so you could have an R&D front office facility in Cambridge and Kendall Square, Boston Seaport, and have a major manufacturing facility elsewhere in the state or the region. And that is something we want to work with them on, because again, to your point, it's not the manufacturing of old. It's not sitting in a dingy windowless room doing something that's kind of dirty and low paying. These are high paying jobs in clean and very advanced facilities doing work for emerging industries. So we want to encourage more of that and think more about how we can encourage that sort of development.
If I could just add something to that real quickly, is that I think I need to dispel the perception in gateway cities that we have this, all this vacant commercial space. And I don't think, that's not the case anymore. And it's certainly not the case in Lowell. I don't think that's really the case in Haverhill anymore. And certainly not the case in Lawrence. What has happened is that there's been tremendous amount of real estate investment that has been made over the, I would say, definitely over the past 5 years. In fact, we probably have about 2,000 housing units that's either have been developed or in the pipeline. So that's going to take a lot of the spaces offline. The other thing is if you were to look at then our industrial park or other commercial buildings, where the space can accommodate those kind of uses, I think those are completely occupied. You cannot find available space in our industrial park. In some of our, in what the remaining stock of our mill space, I think that adaptive reuses of some of those spaces for the manufacturing, it doesn't always work. So while we could try to work and try to support those kind of commercial uses in there, we can make those readily available to all business prospects that are looking at the city. We have a willing workforce. We have a plethora of infrastructure support on water and all those other things. We have talked about the transit-oriented development as far as the availability of to get people to the workplaces. But I think it's always going to be sort of how do you match the available real estate that you have to the business inquiries that are coming in. Sometimes they meet up and sometimes they don't. And also and you're talking about the cost of real estate. I want to give one example because to this makes me still chuckle. There was a biotech company, in this case, and this is when I used to work in Lowell, and they basically took bigger square footage in Lowell than they had in Cambridge, but the cost to rent their space here was less than what they were paying for parking in Cambridge. So, but that goes to that you could actually have back operation. We don't necessarily need a headquarter, we have the back operation. My last comment is that we're not looking to be Kendall Square. But at the same time, we have a version of all those things that are happening in both Boston and Cambridge in a different iteration that's more appropriate to the community that we're serving. And right in the front row, for example, we have E4All, and they are our incubator. They're the ones that have an accelerated program. They're the ones that are spurring the entrepreneurship in Lowell, Lawrence, a whole bunch of other gateway cities as well. So, I think we could hold up on our own in a way, and I think there's a resiliency to these gateway cities, which is why we continue to be successful in our own way in doing the things that we need to do, in supporting development, supporting jobs, creating opportunities.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Right there.
Yes, hi, and I apologize if this is going to be like an award speech because I have so many thoughts to get in at this point, but I've noticed that throughout all this, we're still talking about this north-south dynamic, Boston being a very core part of it, but also Billerica, Reading, Andover, those types of cities that have done major development as well. Sally, you could attest to this. I'm really struggling to find out that this is the Merrimack Valley. We have more of an east-west kind of orientation, and that in itself presents challenges in terms of development along, say, 110, 133, Tewksbury, Dracut, Methuen, and there's just so many questions I could ask about that to the three of you, and maybe to Sal too. I was wondering, in terms of like the transit picture and TOD, like, have you been able to talk to those city managers as well about that? Also, in terms of just being able to grow some of the opportunities in terms of living and jobs between the three main cities, if any of the transit agencies could perhaps maybe think about an express route. Nate, especially shout out to you because you might have commented on that NumTop post with the MVRTA route map. It's just this huge thing that few people know about that connects from Lowell to Salisbury, and it's just amazing. And again, development opportunities across those regions. I mean, I think another challenge is some of the equity, a lot more differences in income neighborhoods between those areas, and as well as density issues. So I know that was kind of a mess, but kind of like the suburbs, any express city kind of lakes, because it takes half an hour to drive on 495, and we know the capacity issues about that, and a single accident can kill off any sort of speed with that, and bus takes like 2 hours, Lowell to Haverhill. It's crazy. And then development. Sorry.
So just, I think there's
probably 3 or 4 different questions in that one, but maybe if we could start, and I think this is something that we've all touched upon. We've heard of the great work that the LRTA is doing, using the Lowell example with the bike share program. But in terms of regional mobility, what do you see as key opportunities here to connect the gateway cities and connect to other markets also?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to affirm kind of your statement that we do have, more of an east-west orientation here, especially as our economies have picked up and becoming more and more independent, once again, from like the Boston market. Suddenly you have folks living in the suburbs and working in Lowell or living in Haverhill and driving to Lowell. That orientation is becoming more and more apparent over time, and we definitely need to do better in terms of what we're providing for transportation options in that direction. I know our regional transit authorities are often doing the best they can with limited resources to map out where people need to go, and to their credit, they're very dynamic and very open in terms of changing routes or re-looking at how they're doing things in order to continue to build that out. But I think this challenge will only get more difficult with time. I would love to see a rail that just went from Lowell to Newburyport and back and forth. That's pie in the sky stuff, but I think we're seeing that's becoming more and more of a challenge over time, especially because all of our transit infrastructure is kind of oriented traditionally more north to south.
Yeah. And just to Sal, I think a great point that you brought up earlier, how TOD presents opportunities for more vibrancy, not just your traditional, commuting back and forth to work type of movement. So in terms of development and the importance of connections and improved mobility there, what do you see as our key opportunities?
So, too many times, once again, and I apologize for saying this, too many times the developer relies upon the city and/or town to solve their transportation. So, what you're describing, some of these suburban markets that we're entered, whether it's Andover or Chelmsford or some of these other locations that we're in the queue right now to do some really fun stuff. And we're talking large-scale projects, right? We're talking about a project in Andover that's probably 600,000 square feet that would love to be in. You would think that is going to be in a gateway city, but the opportunity exists because of the location of the real estate next to 93. One of the things that we're doing over there, and one of the things that we've discussed in other projects, is creating a partnership with a transportation center, and we provide a shuttle system program to get our workers to the transportation system. Once again, too many times the developers say to the cities, what are you going to do for me? Where if they went to the city and town, if they went to somebody like Jim Scannell and said, Jim, if we were to provide a shuttle service or partner on some kind of a shuttle program to get our customers from Andover to the Ballard Vale Transportation Center or some of those other commuter rails in Andover, I think that starts to solve that problem. And when you're talking about TODs in gateway cities like Lowell, imagine the ability if you had almost a version of a park and ride kind of a program. Areas that are in suburbs that will create a destination to where that suburban person goes to that, and every half hour, every hour, that shuttle is going back and forth to a location central to a gateway city. Too many times you're asking the city and town and state to solve your problem. As a developer, as an entrepreneur, you need to think outside the box. You need to solve your own problems, or at least have an uncomfortable conversation of what it might mean to your pro forma. Now, I think this is really interesting. Budgets always fluctuate. They always change in a particular project. Now, and what I mean by that is this. If you have to pick up a shuttle program, well, that you incorporate that part of your project, part of your budget, part of your expenses. And as opposed to trying to grind out those expenses, if you incorporate it, think of the other doors that will open. New businesses, higher rents, more accessibility to your location. And we all know that being able to build out space much quicker is more profitable as getting a lower rent and extending the amount of time that your space is empty. So those are just some of the ideas that we in our organization.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry.
Can I just add kitchen together?
I'll be really quick, because I know we're short on time, but I do want to plug, because this is so apropos to the conversation, I want to plug Middlesex 370 Cronin's in the back there. We've worked extensively with her on these conversations. I think it's really important to bring in the regional conveners into this conversation, because you mentioned, are we having conversations with the town managers of, Drake and Tewksbury, Chelmsford, other areas beyond it. We are directly through the Middlesex 3, but also our private players. So I'm just going to tack on to what Sal just said a moment ago. It is incumbent upon the private sector to think about these things, because city managers, city councils, planners, they can't do it all themselves. If it's the private industry that has the needs to move the folks that live in their housing units or the folks that work in their companies to and from where they are, then they need to be part of these critical conversations, and they definitely are through Middlesex 3. One example of that is we established a shuttle service going back and forth from Lowell to Burlington in order to help with the issue down there of getting workforce to the significant restaurant industry, the service industry that is down there. So now folks who live in Lowell have an easier way to get down to Burlington. I realize that's a north-south versus east and west, but more conversations like that are happening. And then the other piece that we're working on is thinking about how it affects Lowell itself. So we've been working with Stephanie, and I see our neighborhood planner, Chris Hayes, is back here as well. He's been working on a project to think about how do we get people to Lowell, commuters to Lowell, without not necessarily having them drive all their cars into downtown and find places to park here. Can we utilize the property at Cross Point, which is right off of Route 3 and the Lowell connector?
Carl from Jobra says hi.
All right, there you go. All right, so yes, Jobra's in Cross Point. So how do we get folks that are going to be commuting into Lowell and think about how they're going to be parking there, perhaps doing a park and ride situation where they come into here? So we're trying to better understand the workforce in Lowell, where they're coming from, what their commuting patterns are, so we can tackle some of those major issues.
Right, and Teresa?
So I was just going to say that, well, I made my comment about Middlesex to be redundant, so I'll skip that part. But so for the most part, we all do something a little bit different, right? But at the same time, we all do economic development. And when you're talking about economic development, it becomes a regional focus. Because ultimately, if there's a job in Lowell, then there's a good chance that a Lawrence resident could be filling that job and vice versa. So to the extent that we identify and work with those regional organizations, whether it's the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, whether it's the Greater Lawrence Transit Authority, whether it's the Middlesex 3, I think the importance of the role that they serve in trying to look at the collective needs of all those communities, regardless of whether or not you're a suburban community, you're a post-industrial city, whether you're a rural farming community, we're all connected by roadways and in other ways as well. So I think that continue to work with the regional partners in identifying those common interests, and making sure that those improvements that can affect all those communities, that they get addressed, and I think that we engage with them to make that happen.
All right, thank you. So again, partnerships.
Yeah.
So realizing we are way over time, it wasn't our fault, we stuck within our hour. So, we've got time for one more question, and I will say we're going to have the coffee hour afterwards, so if you want to talk to any of our individual panelists, I'm sure everyone will be willing to hang around to answer individual questions. Go right here.
I'm an outlier, or we are. We're from New Bedford, so I'm not going to take much of your time. I don't want to hijack the last couple of minutes we've got here. Sal, I've been trying to get you down in New Bedford for years. I went to one of your Christmas parties. I could get you elected mayor there, I think, okay? I've always felt that Lowell was very similar to New Bedford, vice versa. You've got a national park, we're a national park, the mills, you're on freshwater, we're on saltwater. For 30 years, we've been believing that we were going to get the rail. In fact, we gave up believing. So we all became non-believers. Now, I know it's happening. We believe Charlie Baker's going to do it. I saw it on the last line, on the last slide that Tracy had, saying South Coast Rail. So it's going to happen. I just got done sitting on a steering committee for a Sasaki land use plan. TOD did not even come up in the New Bedford study, okay? We are an open palette. The rail line is already there. We're bringing frozen fish from Alaska to process in New Bedford. Acres of land surrounding it. We don't even talk about TOD. So that's, my question now is, go back 10 years. When I started coming up here watching the Boot Mills project start. Go back 10 years, tell me, what should we be looking at? What red flags? What would you have done differently? okay, when, before you had rail, what would you have done differently? That's what I'd like to know. Everything's perfect here, I get it.
In fairness, Teresa was in my position when the movement, maybe she can take this one.
Thanks.
Sorry.
In honesty, I'm a little stumped in trying to answer your question.
That's good, I
Well,
think that's a good thing.
No, I mean,
I can say this, I mean, I think that, and I think, this is why Lowell has been successful. I think it very early and often engaged its state delegation, federal partners, the administrations that have come and gone throughout the years. I think, being able to work with our private partners like a Salapoli, that are going to sponsor, large-scale investments, and then go to the state and tell them, how are we going to actually actualize these projects? That is something that needs to be done. So you mentioned before that, you think that Charlie Baker is going to be a good champion of getting South Coast Rail down there. So if you feel that way, double down on that and absolutely continue to pursue it, because there's no way any of these large, ambitious projects to, redevelop gateway cities and other post-industrial areas are going to happen without the participation of the state, in some cases, federal partners, because there's so many challenges from, rights-of-way access to environmental remediation to improving the way that our transportation operates to create TOD opportunities like you're describing. So I think really it's just, again, even though partnerships is getting to be a redundant theme here, it couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be closer to the truth that partnerships are really key to getting these things done.
Could I just add to that as well? Even though we have had rail in Lowell for a very long time, I think it's only recently that everybody's realizing the benefit of having it here and really trying to utilize that as a resource. If we go back even like 5-10 years here, I think there's been a real culture shift in the city, and this might sound redundant, but there's the realization that you can't solve traffic problems with more traffic. I know it sounds stupid, but I mean, if you think of it logically, I think this partnership-based approach is really the driver of recognizing Gallagher Station and the rail terminal as the jewel in the crown for TOD and Lowell. And I think there's been a real shift at a national level in terms of planning policies and actual practice, that TOD, while it may seem like a new technique, it's really going back, to historical forms of development and taking advantage of the physical assets that we have, instead of just trying to put your head down and plow for the easiest way out. So Salad mentioned partnerships, the developer not taking the easy option here and working with the cities to understand this is what we need and this is how I can help you get to that vision. And I think that's really a key point here, is that even though we have had rail and we've had a really forward-thinking transit system here, it's only in the last, particularly from the university perspective, 5-10 years that we've seen the benefit of that, and the realization that if we're going to plan for a sustainable community here, that has to be to the forefront of everything. Thank you.
so I'm still struggling with the answer to your question, but I'm going to put it this way, which is that I think in order to have a successful effort, I mean, you want that whole buy-in from that top-down, bottom-up kind of situation. The thing that we haven't talked about is that there are different forms of government, like New Bedford's a strong mayor form of government, Lowell's a city manager form of government, Lawrence is a strong mayor form of government. And I think that when you have change in leadership, I think what's important is that these are long-term projects. Well, you need to just find a way to make sure that those projects that are important, that are long-lasting, somehow they still remain, even with a change in leadership, that they still remain a priority. And to the extent that you have a interest group that continue to maintain this importance as a priority and put that in front of whoever your elected official is, I think that's going to be really important. Added to that is continue to work with your regional economic development organization. And lastly, the Lowell plan is gone, but Lawrence is fortunate to have a Lawrence partnership, their Salem and Salem partnership. And I think of them as sort of a nonpartisan organization that could continue to promote or progress economic development efforts. And working with, if you don't have one of those kind of organizations, is something that you might want to think about. In Lowell, the one in Lawrence is more recent, One in Lowell has been there for, I don't know, for much longer, and they're the ones that have also funded future plans, downtown plans, evolution plan, cultural plans. So, and they also are the ones that convene all the powers that be in that community. So having that forum that where people can dialogue, keep your eyes on the prize, I think that would all be helpful.
Right.
I just want to add one thing to what you were saying, and I think the thought that I have is that the investment in transportation by the Commonwealth, really for decades, and I've been involved with transportation for decades, but particularly for the last 10, 15 years. If you think about Gallagher Station, whether it's 10 or 15 years ago, you think of this outdated station. At that time, we didn't have a commuter bus hub. We don't have a nice station like we have now that's renovated. We don't have a walkway that links Sal's building with the Gallagher terminal. We put in all new concrete on all our floors. So over the past 15 years, the state, as our partner, along with the federal government, has put in anywhere from $10 to $20 million. So I think you really have to really be persistent. You have to recognize the importance of transportation investment. And then you have to realize that the partners, whether it be the city, the developers, the MBTA, you really have to keep pursuing those things. But again, investment goes two ways. It's with the developer and with the state and the federal government.
Great point. So I want to ask closing comment.
So I want to answer your question from a developer's lens.
We need Italian food now. I got loads of Portuguese food, but and great seafood as well.
So I have been saying it's the developer's responsibility, Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. How many times does a salesperson have to contact somebody in order to make a sale? How many touches? They call it 5, 7, 10 touches before I finally will pick up that phone and talk to you or finally make an appointment with you. I really believe cities and towns, they're sales representatives for their community. You have to have a strong and an economic development commission and or part of your city or town development organization is not just to receive it, right? You're not just catching it as it comes. You gotta go get it. You have to come to me half a dozen times. You have to use city, state, federal delegations to reach out to guys like me. I ended up in Salem yesterday because I couldn't stop. Bruce Starr called me 100 times. I'm in Lowell because of the state delegation that brought me to Lowell, because Nikki Saunders brought me to Lowell. I'm in Lawrence, Massachusetts because the mayor called me half a dozen times at my house until I finally went down and looked at a piece of real estate. So it's on your responsibilities to fight hard to get representatives in the development world to take a good look at what you have to offer. When I get there, or when a representative or an organization gets there, are you prepared to have uncomfortable conversations? Are you prepared to have all the stakeholders of your city and town at that table? When I came to the city of Lawrence, city of Lowell, city of Haverhill, I walked into the room, fire, police, planning. All the major players, the mayor, the city manager, all those people were there to answer any questions I might have and to offer assistance. So when a developer sees that, they say, wow, this city or town really has, respectfully speaking, their act together. They're ready to go. They've networked. Also, I think it's really important that if you were to aggregate businesses, because every single day you have small businesses calling you up, hey, I'm looking for 2,000 square feet, or I'm looking for this, or do you have anybody that does this type of a business, or we're looking to come into your city and town. What we do really well is I'll pick up small entrepreneurs, half a dozen of them. I'll aggregate them. I'll say, well, there's 15,000 square feet. Let's go buy a building at 40,000 square feet, and I'll bet that I'll fill the other 25,000 square feet once we start this borrowing size that the professor talks about and that the doctor talks about. So, respectfully, what are the communities doing from the sales approach? And are you really doing everything you can? Are you really touching that representative 7, 8, 10 times? Are you using all the resources, all the tools in your box to get that person down to your community and show them all the great aspects of your city and town? Imagine going to the most challenged city in the state of Massachusetts. Lawrence is 351. I actually think that's a good thing, right? Because we continue to go up, up, and up. But how did you get a developer to go over there and become one of the biggest projects in the state, maybe in the country, when you talk about a $400 million investment, 5,000 jobs? You know how you did it? It was the city. It was people like Teresa. It was the city managers, people like Eileen Donahue and Mayor Fiorentini and the boards that they represent, constantly selling to get those people in there. And that's what it's about. It's about your salesmanship of your community to get developers there. I hope you don't get mad that I just said that.
Great, thank you, that's a great way to wrap things up. I think we could honestly stay here till 5 o'clock with the questions and answers, but I'm getting a heat wall from Tracy here, so I'd like to give a round of applause to our panelists.